Many years ago, I knew a child who I will call Journey. When Journey was born, everyone assumed they were a boy. That's the parts they were born with. Journey went into foster care shortly after birth, and a year or so later was adopted by friends of mine who were a lesbian couple. And within a couple of years, it became obvious that Journey wasn't a conventional boy. They loved everything sparkly and glittery and loved to wear twirly dresses. Neither of their moms wore dresses or makeup, but that didn't stop Journey. This child loved dolls and dresses and singing and playing with their friends. I remember when we went to a queer family event in Provincetown, and Journey, who was probably 4 or so, saw drag queens for the first time. Their moms shared how Journey's eyes just lit up at these big men wearing dresses and makeup and glitter and singing their hearts out to families. Journey had found their people. A couple of things are notable about the last time our families got together after we had moved across the country. Journey was about 8 or 9, I'd guess. It was the mid to late 2000s. And their family had adopted Journey's biological brothers, making a family of 4 kids. First, all the younger brothers were pretty clearly boys. It wasn't the lesbian moms who were pushing their kid not to be a boy. And Journey was really troubled. It was time to go back to school, and they didn't know what to do. When we came over to the house, they were wearing a leotard and doing gymnastics on the floor in the living room. They knew that they weren't comfortable as a boy, but they didn't want other kids to keep making fun of them. And so they'd asked their mom to cut their hair short. And they were pretty stressed about what to do when going back to school and how to handle other people's expectations of them. I don't know whatever happened to Journey. But what I know is that Donald Trump's executive orders about surgical and chemical mutilation and protecting the world for women are not compassionate, are not good policy, and are absolutely not good for kids. Most of us, especially those of us of a certain age, tend to think that there are 2 genders, male and female. If you have a non-complicated view of your own gender, if the parts you were born with pretty much match the way you see yourself, that's probably how you think most everyone is. Those of us who have more friends in the LGBTQ community, or have young friends, or maybe live in liberal areas, might recognize that there are folks who don't consider themselves strictly male or female. Folks who are non-binary, or genderqueer, or gender fluid, or agender. And 2% of the population are born intersex, a situation where their parts aren't necessarily a direct link to their biology, where their biology is something more complicated than XX or XY chromosomes. Because in spite of what Donald Trump thinks, gender runs on a spectrum. For some people, we never had to think about it. Our parts matched the way we saw or thought about ourselves, and we continued blithely along. For some folks, their parts didn't match their identities, and this was painfully or blessedly clear their entire lives. Some trans folks talk about being completely clear that they were in the wrong body their whole life. And I think for some people, it's easiest to understand trans people who have that particular story or experience. It fits in with our ideas about gender as a clear binary. But as our country was coming to understand sexual orientation as something more complicated than just sin, we talked about sexual orientation as a different way of being wired, as you were born that way. And folks understood it better as an irrefutable fact, the way you were made, clear as day. They just can't help it. Straight or gay, bisexuals just hadn't made their minds up yet. But we know that that's not true. We know that sexual orientation exists on a spectrum. Some folks are completely or almost exclusively heterosexual. Some folks are completely or almost exclusively homosexual. But there are a whole lot of us who are attracted to people, human beings, gender notwithstanding. And as more folks realize their full spectrum of gender identities, well, let's say there's a reason that I identify as queer. It feels more accurate, more inclusive of who I am and who I love or have the potential to be attracted to. Because the truth is, as we re-examine gender, or reimagine gender, that gender, just like sexual orientation, is on a spectrum. You've got the rugged stereotype of masculinity with body hair and muscles and jeans. And then you have women in heels and makeup and long hair. But there are a whole lot of us that are kind of somewhere in the middle there. And even if we're pretty clear where we are in the binary part, gender is a spectrum. I'm a cisgender woman. My gender identity mostly aligns with the body parts I was born with. But I'm also a queer woman who has been mostly partnered with women for the last 37 or so years. And as a member of the LGBTQ community for a long time, many of my closest friends are queer and trans and non-binary. My spouse, Dees, is non-binary. This stuff hits close to home for me. There's a wonderful book I bought for Dees a while ago called To Survive on This Shore, written by Jess T. Dugan and Vanessa Fabre. It's a book of photographs and interviews with transgender and gender non-conforming older adults. I love the variety of photos and stories that the book reflects. Stories of trans men and trans women, gender non-conforming butches and folks who identify as genderqueer, Black, white, Hispanic, Native, Asian, people ages 50 through 90. I love the variety of their stories. And I'm going to share with you a few excerpts because I think when we're talking about a group of people, it's crucial to listen to their own words. Jay, who is 59 and from New York, says, I'm a pretty classic transgender man as I see it, because from my earliest reflections as a tiny child, I experienced myself as a boy in a girl's body. I felt that some dreadful mistake had been made and I didn't get the body I was supposed to. I prayed every night to God to make me wake up a boy the way I was supposed to be. And that orientation never changed throughout the entire trajectory of my life. Aiden, who is 52 from Burien, Washington, says, at the time of contemplating my gender and the trans element of it, I'd been solidly entrenched in the dyke community, and I loved that. I felt really looked after and mentored and cared for. What they had brought into my world was a celebration of masculinity rather than a dismissal. It was like, bring it. It looks beautiful. We love it. We celebrate it. And that felt really good to me. And here I am, almost 20 years later, still thinking and talking about gender. You know, what is my gender? I don't have an answer to that, and I don't need an answer. I've never felt fully female, and I'll never feel fully male, and that's really just fine. I feel pretty good about how I move through the world. And then Renee, who is 68 and from Chicago, writes, I think first of all that I'm more bi-gender than purely transgender. I enjoy both genders, and I miss the one I'm not. And it's been like that for as long as I've been able to peel away the layers and get to it. So most of my life I denied it. I just kept it buried. One of the things that's been frustrating for my wife is that it has come out one struggling inch after another. I, like many of my generation, buried it deep and wrapped it in subterfuge. But as I started going to functions in Chicago that included younger trans people, they were using genderqueer as an expression. I'm probably more genderqueer than I am one or the other. I'm me. I'm who I am, and I can do what I want. I can wear what I want. I can look like what I want. I think everybody should have that freedom. Everybody should have that freedom. Just like the LGBTQIA+ community realized that it wasn't a clear-cut example of straight and gay, and those are your only options, we are realizing that two genders don't always contain the multitudes that are within us. Some of the kids and the adults in the congregation that I serve in Oregon City are absolutely transgender. They are clear and always have been that they were born in the wrong body. Some of the kids and adults that I serve are really clearly non-binary. They know that they don't fit into one box in the same way that other people do. What I do know is that it's really important to respect people's identities, even if it's not what you think you see when you look at them, even if it doesn't make sense to you. It's okay. It doesn't have to make sense to you. Everyone has the right to say who they are. But Donald Trump and this particular flavor of Republicans, which I do not believe represent all Republicans, swept into office claiming a mandate against woke politics. Many folks now accept gays and lesbians because now everyone knows somebody who is gay or lesbian. But transgender adults are only about 1% of the population. And if you don't know if somebody is trans, you probably don't know if you know somebody who is trans. And so trans people became a convenient scapegoat for the religious right to incite fear among folks. And I think that I know why this is important. Because one of the main goals that Trump has this term, besides getting rid of all non-white immigrants, is to eliminate all DEI initiatives. DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, are basically civil rights protections that have given more people a shot at jobs white men used to think were only for them. Employers, including the government, were supposed to look at policies that broadened the hiring pool to include more people of color and women and folks with differing abilities. You may have heard the president blame DEI for the plane crash that killed 67 people in DC last week. There is no evidence that DEI had any effect on that accident. But because more than any other group, diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives have benefited white women, the right are, quote unquote, protecting women from violence, discomfort, and perhaps competing in athletics against a person who used to be a boy. Among the over 500,000 athletes in the NCAA, people who play college sports, the rule against trans women competing as women will affect how many people? 10. Yes. In Jason Stanley's book, How Fascism Works, he discusses several hallmarks of fascism, which include the heralding of a mythic past, echoes of Make America Great Again, hierarchy, a sense of victimhood that sees enemies both internal and external, sexual anxiety, fear of homosexuality and of women, and a belief that hard work is the only key to success. Protecting women from a non-existent threat is a way of trying to make sure that women don't complain about losing their own careers and positions in the name of eliminating DEI. And it is also a key hallmark of fascism. Somehow trans people have become the quicksand of 2025. Do you remember when you were a kid and we were all terrified of quicksand? You thought you were going to encounter it everywhere? I have never seen quicksand in my life. It is not something to be afraid of. Neither are trans people, I gotta tell you. My queer and trans friends, my community are scared. Folks aren't sure if they'll be able to get medications that they've been on for years. I have to tell you that most trans men who have been on testosterone look like typical men. They've got facial hair, they've got male pattern baldness, and if you want to start sending those people into women's bathrooms, then you're going to get people freaking out. I have friends who are thinking they'll need to flee the country. I have friends who have had all of the surgeries and are now in this weird legal limbo where what their original birth certificate says does not match what their body looks like in any way, shape, or form. Friends who have had their passports confiscated with no idea when they'll get their documents back. It is terrifying. Human beings cannot be legislated out of existence. Trans and non-binary people exist. They always have. They always have. Eunuchs in the Bible. We now have a language that recognizes their humanity and medical treatments that affirm what they know to be true. Trump and Musk are trying to vilify a small group of human beings to keep a larger group of human beings afraid and believing that these people are the only ones who can keep them safe. They are using scary words like chemical and surgical mutilation to describe things like puberty blockers, which are completely reversible. All they do is give kids time to delay puberty until they're certain of the gender that they are. Because if you're really clear as a child that you are a girl, you don't necessarily want to hit puberty at 6'2" with an Adam's apple before you're allowed to change your gender. The executive order states in terrifying language, "Countless children soon regret that they have been mutilated and begin to grasp the horrifying tragedy that they will never be able to conceive children of their own." But Alex Marzano-Lesnevich writes in the New York Times that we now know that gender-affirming healthcare has some of the lowest rates of regret in medicine. A 2021 systemic review of the medical literature covering 27 studies and almost 8,000 transgender patients found a regret rate of 1% or less. Weight loss surgery, for example, has a regret rate of between 5 and 20%. Fewer than 1% of people regret medically transitioning. Studies show that almost half of trans and non-binary kids consider suicide. And it's not because they hate being trans. It's because they hate being trans in a world that sees them as wrong or diseased or unworthy of medical care and support. In the 24 states that have banned or restricted trans-affirming healthcare for minors in the last 3 years, suicide attempts among trans youth have gone up 72%. That's not protecting children. That's not protecting kids. Suddenly, trans and non-binary folks are being discriminated against in ways that are cruel and unnecessary. No one else's gender hurts you. It is just not your business. And despite the fear-mongering, it doesn't hurt kids to be taken seriously. No one is performing surgery on 10-year-olds, I swear to God. Instead, we are taking a group of kids who are subjected to bullying at far higher rates than other kids and deciding somehow that a 78-year-old man knows better than their parents, their doctors, and themselves who they are and what they need. It is unnecessary and it is cruel. My goal today, as is my goal most of the time, is to have you listen to other people's stories, to understand a little bit about others' lives or your own lives or your kids' lives or your friends' kids' lives, to cultivate knowledge and empathy and compassion and understanding. May we be a safe place for people to express their gender in whatever way is true for them. May we love the people who show up in our lives and let them show up in all their selves. May it be so. Blessed be, and amen.